Give me one sec so I can close this. Okay, I think we're in business. All right, I hope everyone's doing well. Just a couple housekeeping notes. The first is Hanukkah's tomorrow night, so that's exciting. Wishing everybody a happy Hanukkah. Hope that wherever you are, you get to enjoy and get and you stay safe, and fire safety and COVID safety are all super important, obviously. Also, if you've been joining us on the Hanukkah hike, which is this really fun program, we've got this great app. We've got over 220 some odd people signed up who are participating, and over 100 people in the app. And collectively, we've already walked 2,000 miles, which is pretty exciting. We're well on our way to reaching our goal of hitting 6,000 miles, which is the distance between here and Israel. And it's been awesome seeing how competitive people are and how competitive families have been. So if you haven't been on the app, or you're not following along, just call the office. We'll get you hooked in. It's a lot of fun. It's been really great to see. And especially now, it's some good old-fashioned, safe, COVID-friendly fun, which is getting out and about and exercising. So, all right, with that. Oh, and then next week, we've got Tuesday night, we have our Hanukkah program. We're having a game show led by a really fun guy out of Florida. And you can order pizza through the shul, so please join us for that. It's a joint event with Anshe, so it'll be fun to have the communities come together. And I've told everybody that the Baron Hirsch people are very good at all forms of games, so please don't disappoint. That's a lot to live up to. All right, let's jump in. I want to talk up this morning, or I guess today, this afternoon, whatever time it is now. I would love to talk a little bit about this week's Parshat Vayeshev. And just a very difficult set of circumstances. So our Parsha, just for on a high level, is the story of Joseph and his brothers. And if you need a primer, you can just go on YouTube and watch the Broadway play. It's pretty accurate. But we have to understand. We know, so again, Joseph's brothers sell Yosef down to Egypt. Yosef goes to Egypt, and he plays an important role until the family eventually comes down to Egypt, which begins the Passover story and the Egyptian bondage, which ultimately leads to the Jewish people leaving as a nation and going to receive the Torah, and so on and so forth, the fulfillment of the promises that God makes to Abraham. However, given all of that, we have to ask ourselves, what is the motivation of the brothers to mistreat and to treat Yosef so poorly? In other words, why do the brothers actually hate Yosef? Is their hatred justified? Are their actions justified, or are they not? And in particular, this question is, I think, very germane, because when we think about the brothers, these are not just 11 Joe Schmoes. These are the people who become the Shvatim. These are the people who come to serve as the role models and the bedrock for the Jewish people. They are literally the Bnei Yisrael. The entire Jewish people is made up of them. Right? These are they are the heads of the tribes. So if these are not righteous people, that would be a problem. But if they are righteous people, how do we justify their actions in the sale of Yosef? So with that, I want to actually spend some time looking at the verses. It's the length of the entire chapter. So let me first share my screen with you. And let's take a peek here at what's going on. Okay, so it begins on Parshat Vayeshev, chapter 37, Vayeshev Yaakov, Be'eretz Migorei Aviv, Be'eretz Canaan, right? Yaakov settles in the land where his father had sojourned, the land of Canaan. And this pasuk ties back to the previous set of verses in chapter 36, which has to do with Esav and his family and where they were settling. So Esav's family settles in Har Seir, and Yaakov is going to settle in the land of Canaan. So that's the tie-in to the previous parsha, the previous chapter and verse. But now we pick up here in verse number 2. Ela Toldot Yaakov. These are the children of Yaakov. Yosef ben Shvas Reshana. Yosef is 17 years old, and he was Haya Ro'eh et Achav Batzon. He would tend the flocks with his brothers. V'hu Na'ar et b'nei Bilha ve'b'nei Zilpah. And he was Na'ar. Here it's translated to mean helper. I would say he was very friendly with the children of Bilha and Zilpah, Neshei Aviv, who were his father's wives. Again, these are the maidservant wives. Yosef at Dibatam Ra'a al Aviham, and Yosef brought bad reports of them to their father. V'Yisrael ahav et Yosef mikol banav ki ben zikunim hulo v'asa lo ketonet pasim. And Israel, meaning Yaakov, loved Yosef best amongst all the sons, for he was the child of his old age, and he made for him a ketonet pasim. He made him a coat of many colors, this ornamented tunic, again, the coat of many colors. The brothers see that Yosef is loved most, mikol achav, Yosef is loved more than anyone else. They hated him, and they could not speak a friendly word to him. So let's just stop here for just a moment before we continue with the part of the dreams. How do the brothers feel towards Yosef, and why do they feel this way? Do they like him? Do they not like him? And why do or don't they like him?
Says they hate him, and it probably sounds like jealousy.
Okay, so where is their hatred coming from? What's driving it? Is
His father liked him better. He made him a special coat.
So you're suggesting that this really has to do with the coat, right? Let me go back to
I don't know about the coat, but the way the father treated him better, differently.
That he was treated differently than anybody else.
He loved him the best.
Uh-huh. Okay, so it's simple jealousy, sibling rivalry. That's what Paul's saying.
I think it's because he told on him all the time.
Oh, so good. So Robin is introducing a second piece, which we often overlook, which is this notion here that what does he do? Vayavi Yosef et dibatam ra'a el aviham. He brought bad reports of them to their father. What does that mean?
It means he wasn't a comrade with his brothers. I mean, he didn't seek to be, one of the boys. I mean, he held himself out above his brothers, and he never tried to become one of them.
So whose fault is it that Yosef is hated? Is this self-inflicted?
Probably a lot of it is due to self-inflicted. He could have made amends with his brothers. He could have, made an effort to be one of the boys, but he didn't.
So it's Yosef's fault that his brothers hate him.
Not all his fault, but he didn't do anything to endear himself to his brothers.
He was also born from Rebecca, wasn't he, Rabbi?
From Rachel, yes.
Rachel.
Yes.
And Rachel was Joseph's intended bride over Leah.
Yes, Yaakov's intended bride. Correct. So we're going to get to that in just a moment. So that might be. So you're suggesting, why is it that Yaakov loved him the most, right? Or loved him the most. Ahav Yosef mikol banav, is he loved him the most because of Rachel, because he loved Rachel the most.
But it says that it's in his old age, which is not pointing to Rachel per se. It seems like a time in his life that it makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure what that means, but it seems like it's not talking. They're specifically saying that it's because it was in his old age.
Interesting. Now you should just know, if we go back one verse here, when it says that Joseph brought bad reports of them to their father, there is an opinion that suggests that Yosef was doing like what do you call? Is it called like shuffle diplomacy? I don't know, where he's going back and forth. Right. And that there was a lot of conflict between his siblings and each other, and Yosef was giving dibatam ra'ah. Ra'ah might not mean bad, but as much as he was trying to help his father see what was going on, and that would tie into this idea that he was na'ar epnei Bilha v'bnei Zilpah. Who cares that he was friendly with the wives of Bilha, the children of Bilha and Zilpah? Well, they were mistreated by Leah's children, and so he was trying to offer some diplomacy and try to make things right, and he would come back to Dad and say, Dad, this is not working out. Everyone's hating each other. They're fighting this one and that. And he was trying to create peace, which would lead us to the next piece of, why is it that Yosef is loved? He's loved the most because he's actually a little bit more mature, which is not the way that we normally read the story. we normally read it as that there's maybe a sense of immaturity with the way that he acts, as we'll see in just a moment. But maybe this idea that he like is the leader of the children, and that he's trying to create peace amongst his brothers, which might be why Yaakov loves him. Ki ben zikunim hu lo, he was a child of his old age, implying that Yaakov knew that his life was coming to an end. He's settled in the land where his father had sojourned. He wasn't planning on doing any more travel. There was no plans of going to Egypt or anything like that. So he's kind of settling in. He's looking for one of his children to step up to the plate to take over the mantle of leadership, and Yosef is really doing that. And so he gives him a special gift. Now, before we delve any further, let's just quickly talk about the dreams. So right after the brothers...
Can I make one more point?
Yes, please.
Yes. The fact that Jacob was old and he had a very close relationship to his son, that seems like a natural consequence of him confiding in his son and asking his son to help him, because he saw in Joseph what which could help him, and also he loved him on maybe because of that, and so maybe he was a peacemaker and a someone who facilitated what Jacob couldn't in his old age, especially.
Yeah, so I think that you're saying similar to what I was just saying. Correct. I think that's definitely a possibility. I think so. So let's just notice. So again, the very next pasuk after the Torah tells us that they can't say a nice word about the guy, right? All of a sudden he comes along. Vayachalom Yosef chalom. He dreams a dream, and what does he do? So think about just like, again, the Torah is creating this like conflict here with these verses next to each other, which is that he literally couldn't say a nice word about him. They didn't want to talk to him, and he goes and he talks to them. So what happens when he talks to them? Vayosifu od snooto. They hate him even more for it, that he dreams this dream. And then he says, Vayomer shimu na chalom hazeh shechamti. Now listen carefully to the dream that I have. And again, we know this dream well, which is that they're binding sheaves in the field, and suddenly one sheaf stands up and the other ones are remaining upright, and then they bow down to his sheaf. So again, and so they respond in verse 8, you think you're going to rule over us, that all of our sheaves are going to bow down to you? So here the Torah is telling us that it's not just that they hated him over his words, but also his dreams as well. And again, he dreams a second dream, and notice the response this time. After the second dream, this is the sun and the stars and the moon, and this time they're all bowing down to him. And Vayekanu bo echav, his brothers are very angry about this. They're jealous of him. V'aviv shamar tadavar, and his father kind of puts in the back of his memory and keeps that in mind for another moment. And then the brothers go off and pasture their father's flock in Shechem, and Yosef eventually goes to find them. But for our intents and purposes here, I really think that there are three distinct possibilities as to why the brothers hate him so much and want to kill him. The first possibility is that Yosef is simply speaking bad about his brothers, right? And maybe not all of his brothers, maybe just some of his brothers, and that doesn't sit well, obviously. And the second possibility, I think that we can suggest, is that they hate him because of his dreams. And the third possible reason why there's so much animosity is because of Yaakov's actions. What does Yaakov do? He gives him a special gift. Now, if you think about it, by the way, that two of these reasons have to do with Yosef and one has to do with Yaakov. And I would actually argue that this is actually there's a measure for measure punishment that takes place here. Where, what do I mean by measure for measure punishment? That Yosef speaks bad about his brothers. What happens to Yosef later on? What's the measure for measure punishment for his actions? Potiphar's wife slanders him and eventually throws him into jail. She speaks bad about him, right? What does Yosef do? He dreams dreams that cause hate and animosity. What happens? He has to spend his life listening and interpreting to dreams as he is a servant in prison. And what's Yaakov's punishment by creating animosity, by having a favorite son, by giving him a special cloak? It's the very same coat that is returned to him with the idea that Yosef is dead, meaning that's an unnecessary detail. Why does he have to get the cloak back at all? he gets it back as a punishment because it's the cloak itself that creates the animosity. And in fact, the Medrash Rabbah tells us that, and just spending a minute on Yaakov's love for Yosef for a minute, look what the Medrash says. The Medrash teaches us that Reish Lakish b'shem Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Amar, Tzarich Adam shelo l'shanot ben mibanav. A person should not distinguish between children. Why? Because we learn from this story that because he treated one different than the other, so it created this animosity and this hate. And by the way, this idea that Yaakov would do this is an interesting question. Why he actually loved Yosef more? I think there's really two possibilities. One is, like we said, ties to the idea of Rachel, that he loved Rachel. And I think you can read even that idea in two ways. One is that maybe Yosef reminded Yaakov of Rachel in look or in character and speech or something like that, and he therefore was close to her, to him, because he wanted to be close to his deceased wife Rachel. Or another possibility is that Yaakov kept Yosef and Benjamin close to him because, remember, there is a famous idea that Yaakov said, "Whoever has these idols with them, whoever stole your idols will surely die." And Chazal tie that into the death of Rachel herself, that because Rachel stole the idols from her father Lavan, and Yaakov made this promise and this curse, that she eventually was cursed and died. And if that is true, so maybe Yaakov was concerned that this curse might continue to the next generation and impact Yosef and Binyamin as well. And if it was going to impact them, so he does what? He needs to keep them extra safe and extra close, which might help us understand why later Yaakov is reticent about sending Binyamin on to Egypt as well, because he's certain that there's a curse. If Rachel dies unexpectedly, and Yosef, he thinks, dies unexpectedly, then certainly maybe Benjamin will as well. So that kind of helps us understand it. Or the second possibility that we can suggest is that Yosef is just Rachel's firstborn child, and this is the primary wife, and so he is the firstborn, so he is treated differently. As an aside, the Torah actually tells us very explicitly about what you're supposed to do when you have two wives who have children. One wife is loved, one wife is hated. You can't skip over your hated wife's son if they are the firstborn. You can't do that. And so it could be that the Torah in Devarim is simply giving us, is after the fact trying to create rules so another Yaakov situation doesn't come up.
Isn't
But
there
in any
a
case,
third?
leaving all that aside, it's interesting, and if we had more time, we would go into it.
Isn't there a third possibility that the practicality that this son was the youngest, right?
Yosef is not the youngest. Benjamin was the youngest.
Was he? He says in his old age, so I guess that would make him very young.
But Yosef was certainly one of the youngest, second youngest. I mean, you know.
So I mean, on a practical level, you would think that he could make a close relationship because he had to care for the younger of his sons. Children.
Maybe, but either way, Yaakov loves him more. So, and again, maybe the Torah is offering a commentary in Devarim by telling us not to do this. But either way, we still have to ask our question, which is, listen, a person could hate somebody. You can hate someone with all your heart. I don't advise it. It's not good. The Torah doesn't. It tells us explicitly you shouldn't have hatred in your heart for a fellow Jew of another person. But to act on it, that's really bad. In other words, so fine, the brothers didn't like their brother. Okay, guess what? Yaakov and Esav don't get along either, right? Yitzchak and Ishmael don't get along. Cain and Hevel don't get along. The theme of the entire book of Genesis of Bereshit is sibling rivalry. Good, but short of Cain and Hevel, when Cain kills Hevel and commits fratricide, so they don't get along, but they manage to coexist. How can we understand how the brothers would go and take this next step and actually think about killing their brother Yosef? How could they do that? Like, let's look at the Psukim just for 1 second, just so you see it very explicitly. I'm not taking anything out of context. This is what the Torah tells us. So again, Yosef goes on his way, he meets a man, blah, blah, blah. And take a look here at verse 18. Vayeru oto merachok. They saw him coming from afar. Uveter mikrav aleh mitnaklu oto lamito. Before he got close, they conspired to kill him. Vayomru ish el achiv. Hine ba'al achal mot el hazeh ba. Hey, look, it's that dreamer kid coming, our brother. He is coming. Ve'ata lechu v'nahargeu v'nashlichu b'achad haborot. Let's kill him and toss his dead body into one of these pits. V'amarnu chaya ra'achaltanu v'nera ma yeh chalamotav. That some savage beast devoured him, and let's see what comes of these great dreams that he has, right? So it's very clear, I think. It's quite obvious, in fact, that the brothers want to kill him. How could it be that the holy brothers who are going to receive blessings from Yaakov want to kill their brother just because they hate him? Is anyone else bothered by that question? What do you think? This is pretty drastic. There's lots of people that maybe I don't like, but I would never conspire with others to kill them. What is motivating the brothers here to take such extreme action? Because he dreamt a dream? Because he said some bad words about him? He was a kid. He was immature.
Because they don't want to be subservient to their younger brother.
But that's a reason to kill somebody?
No, it might be one reason. In other words, on top of others.
It certainly could play a role, but I mean, taking someone's life is a pretty serious thing. And to think of the brothers as being righteous, it's hard to make sense of that, right? These are the Shvatim, these are Tzadikim Gemurim, they're Yehuda. Yehuda is the great Yehuda, right? I mean, these are the models for us of the Shvatim. So the Sforno was bothered by this and has a novel approach I want to share with you. Sforno says as follows. So let's read in English. It's a little easier to read this way. So if we understand the thoughts described in our verses in this vein, we can solve the riddle of how the stones in the breastplate of the high priest could have been inscribed with the names of all these brothers. In other words, he's asking our question. If these people were really righteous, how could their names be on how could we call the Shvatim by their names? How could they be on the Kohen Gadol's breastplate and the Choshen? So if instead of being as righteous as such models ought to have been in order to serve as inspiration for us, they had indeed harbored such murderous thoughts without justification. In other words, if they were just murderers, then they never would have been given any type of proper place in our history books. So he explains as follows. Even if the brothers' intention to sell Yosef had been based on mere hatred, how could such brothers qualify as inspiration for the Jewish people on the breastplate of the high priest? So we must therefore endeavor to understand the collective feeling of the brothers as being that they actually felt themselves threatened by Yosef's aspirations. And they were convinced that when one feels threatened, one is entitled or even obliged to take measures to neutralize the source of the danger. This is even a halachic principle spelled out in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, that again, haba lehargacha, if a person comes to kill you, so you're allowed to go up and kill him first. So in other words, what's happening here? So if we needed any proof of the truth of brothers' feelings, it is best provided by their conversation amongst them while they're in jail, when they felt that God had repaid them for their misdeeds. They don't regret selling Yosef, nor even having planned to kill him. The only thing they regretted and considered themselves guilty of is that they had not responded to Yosef's pleas for mercy when he was in the pit. In other words, even over 20 years after the event, that they were still convinced that Yosef had posed the sort of threat to their existence which entitled them to take extreme defensive action against him. So what is the Sforno saying here? That the brothers, after careful deliberation amongst themselves, decide that he is a rodef, right, David? Right, that's when it, right? He's a rodef. So he was someone who was going to cause them harm. What harm was he going to cause them? Let's go back to the second pasuk. When he is giving dibatam ra'a el avihem, when Yosef is speaking bad to his father about his brothers, the brothers are thinking, oh my goodness, our father might disinherit us because of the bad things Yosef is saying. And if our father disinherits us, then there won't be the 12 tribes. We have an obligation to save the Jewish people so that we can continue to exist and make sure that this happens, that there'll be the 12 tribes. We need to kill our brother. We don't want to do it, but we have a halachic obligation because his actions are going to cause us ultimately to be killed and to be disinherited. Look at the dream that he had, that we're going to be nothing, that he's going to be the sole person. That's not the future of the Jewish people that we know and that was promised. And
do we know anything about what the brothers were doing that was so bad?
No, we don't know anything about their actions. All we know is that Yosef was talking bad about them. Whether they were acting bad is a different story. Just because Shaya tells me that Nava did something bad in the house doesn't mean Nava did something bad, right? So just because Yosef is talking bad doesn't mean that that is actually necessarily the case, right?
Yeah.
Everyone understand what I'm saying?
Rabbi, throughout all this, am I to believe that Joseph was totally oblivious to the feelings of his brothers towards him? That he didn't realize that might have been some animosity between him and his brothers? Didn't he ever take that into account?
Well, that was the question we started with, which is how much of this is self-inflicted upon himself? In other words, the Sforno is saying that, yeah, Yosef was, the brothers thought what they were doing was right. I mean, in the end, we see that it was not right what they did, but their intentions are not coming from an unrighteous place.
So some of the blame for all of this and Joseph's fate was in his own hands to change, and then he chose not to.
Maybe. I mean, again, it's like telling a kid, sometimes when you're not mature enough to understand it, it's hard to do that, right?
Do we know what age he was at this
He was
time?
17.
Okay.
Torah tells that explicitly. So that's.
But Rabbi,
Yes.
no, I was going to say, in the defense of the brothers, they came from a dysfunctional family. You had multiple mothers and brothers and sisters, and you lived in a camp, and you have to think about how they were living. So they were probably really afraid of him because he had the dad's ear, and if they didn't get an inheritance or they didn't get some of that, they were out in the cold. It wasn't like they could just go off and start another business or something. So I think you got to sort of defend the brothers a little bit. I'm not saying they were right, but certainly to some degree.
Yeah, so I think your point is well taken, which is.
So even if he was only 17, there's nothing here to say that he can try to, make things better. He didn't do anything to make things better, Joseph.
I agreed. I just want to go back for a minute before we get to that point, just to Bernard's point, which is what Bernard is saying here is that, yeah, that's the Sforno's comment, is that the brothers are, how could it be that the great brothers could do such a terrible thing? These are the people the Shvatim are named after. The answer is, yeah, they did what they had to do, right? And yeah, to your point, Herb, yeah, Yosef could have done better. He absolutely could have done better, but he doesn't do better. It's self-inflicted. It's self-inflicted. I want to share another approach with you, which I think is also a very kind of cool way of reading the story. It's, again, a different way to read the whole story. And it's based on a strange comment that is made by one of the brothers. Let's look back here for a second. And just a different way to read the story, but I think ties into this idea from the Sforno really nicely. So again, they're on their way. We said they're going to go kill him. So what happens? So Reuven, when he hears, let's kill him, Vayishma Reuven hears this conversation. Vayatzileu miadam vayomer lo nakenu nafesh. Reuven hears it. He tries to, the Torah says explicitly, he tried to save Yosef. He says, guys, we don't need to kill anybody. Vayomer alehem Reuven al tishbechu dam. Reuven says, guys, we don't need to kill him. Let's just hashlicho to'abor. Let's throw him into the pit. Let's throw him there, right? And that'll be it, right? His plan was what? To save him from the brothers and eventually to go back and restore him to his father. That was Reuven's plan all along. And what was his mindset? He thinks, if I don't do this, who do you think they're going to blame? Reuven is going to be the one who gets blamed. It's not going to be anybody else. He's the firstborn. He's the eldest. He's got to know better, right? So he's trying to kind of save his own skin, maybe, but nonetheless, the means might not matter. The end says his plan is exactly what? Shivo el Aviv, to save Yosef. Vahi kasher ba Yosef achiv. Sure enough, Yosef shows up. They take off his cloak, right? They throw him into the pit. It's empty with no water in it. Rashi tells us it was empty and had no water, but it had other things inside of it, not very pleasant things, scorpions and snakes and things like that. The brothers go and have a meal. They see a bunch of Ishmaelites coming on their way to Egypt. Look in verse 26. Yehuda now turns to his brother and says, what would we gain by actually killing our brother and covering up his blood? right? Let's not have first degree murder on our hands or second degree murder, right? So Reuven's plan says, why should we kill him outright? Just toss him in a pit, let him die that way. We don't need blood on our hands. And Yehuda says, no. Why even let him die at all? We don't need any blood on our hands. Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. So he's our brother, right? We don't have to actually kill him. Let's just do it. And the brothers agree to Yehuda's plan. And what happens? So Midianite traders pass by. They pull Yosef out of the pit. They actually sell Yosef to the Ishmaelites for 20 kesef. At Yosef Mitzrayim, and Yosef gets taken to Egypt. Vayeshev Reuven ala ba'or b'nei ein Yosef ba'or. Reuven returns to the pit, and Yosef is no longer in the pit. Vayikrat begadav. He literally tears his clothes. Vayashev alachav vayomar. He turns to his brothers and says, Hayelad einenu vani ana aniva. Where's the boy? What am I going to do now? What happened to him? So there are two big problems in the story. Is anyone bothered by anything here? Like in particularly, like, I don't know, verse 27 and 28?
I go from Ishmaelites to Midianites to Ishmaelites.
Yeah, so what's going on here? Who actually sells Yosef?
So Midianites.
Do the brothers actually ever sell him?
Sounds like the Midianites sold him.
I mean, it's exactly what it sounds like, right? So there's a big debate as to whether the brothers ever actually sell Yosef to Egypt. They definitely throw him in the pit. Everybody agrees with that. But the question is whether or not he is sold by him. Who's the one who takes him out of the pit? Right? They pulled Joseph out of the pit. Who's the they? The Midianite traders passed by and they pulled him out of the pit. Look at how the Rashbam reads it. Rashbam says as follows. So while the brothers were sitting down to consume their meal, having distanced themselves, they were keeping social distance as well, somewhat from the pit into which they had thrown Yosef in order not to be guilty of eating while spilling blood, because it's not a good look to have a meal while you're killing somebody. So they were waiting for the Ishmaelites to come, who they had seen in the distance, to arrive. And during this period, the Midianites coming from a different direction had passed by, saw this man in the pit, saw Yosef in the pit crying. They pull him up and they were the ones who proceeded him to sell him to the Ishmaelites. So one may assume that the brothers had no knowledge of this whatsoever. And even though the Torah appears to attribute the sale of Yosef to the Ishmaelites to the brothers based on his accusations later in when he's down in Egypt, when he says, you sold me, we would have to say that, but that because of their having been instrumental in bringing about that sale, they're considered as if having assisted in the sale. I think we can read it more simply than that, which is that from Yosef's perspective, he doesn't know that his brothers didn't sell him. Yosef thinks all along that the brothers sold him to Egypt. That's his working assumption. He doesn't know that the brothers were, according to Rashbam, that the brothers were off on the side somewhere, and they're off the side hanging out, and they're having lunch, talking about what they're going to do. And in the meantime, what happens? Some Midianites come along and pick them up before it's too late. So when Reuven is going back, Reuven realizes, so again, let's put the pieces in place here. Reuven shows up. Where was Reuven? Where did he go? So Rashi says that it was his turn to take care of his father, or maybe he was repenting for the sin that he did with Bilhah and by moving the beds or something like that. But where was Reuven? What does it mean that Reuven went to the pit and didn't find him? So I think this fits in really nicely here. Reuven heard Yehuda's plan to sell him. And he says, hold on. I'll be the one to sell him. You know, a good idea, Yehuda, because Reuven has his own plans to save him. So his plan all along was to go to the pit, pull his brother out of the pit, save him from this. And what's the proof? He turns to the brothers and says, where is Yosef? And if the brothers would have sold him, what would the brothers' answer have been? They would have been, oh, see down the road, see those merchants? We sold them to him 5 minutes ago. But the fact that the brothers never respond, that they sold him at all, and the fact that the Torah doesn't tell us that Reuven just kept on walking down the street and went to go, he ran after the pickup truck to find him, seems to indicate that the brothers themselves never actually sold him at all, but rather the Midianites come along. Again, that doesn't mean that they don't get punished. It doesn't mean that they're not guilty, but it does seem to imply that the brothers didn't have a direct hand in this sale as well. But there's another idea that is based on this from the Barbanel, which is going to blow your mind. Maybe, so again, going with the idea that they never sold him, maybe Reuven and Yehuda were actually trying to simply test the prophecy that they heard from Yosef. In other words, they heard this prophecy. These are holy men. Like we said before from the Sforno. How could we say that these were unholy, unrighteous men? No, these were holy men. The Sforno has it right. They were tzaddikim. These are the shvatim. They heard the prophecy. They heard this dream. They didn't want to accept this dream. So Barbanel says, what's going on here? So Reuven raises the possibility that maybe Yosef's dreams are actually true. And he says, we can't kill him, because if we were to kill him, we would be violating and we might be ruining God's master plan. So Reuven says, let's just throw him in the pit. And look at the language that the Torah uses here. It's like so spot on, the Barbanel. I mean, it's such a clever answer. He says as follows, right? He says, what's that? What? They say, let's kill him. Why do they want to kill him? Let's see what's going to come of his dreams. Why mention that? So the Barbanel here is saying that their entire plan here was to kill him to see, okay, well, let's see let's see if there's real prophecy. If he's the chosen one, then we shouldn't be able to kill him if his dreams are true. Reuven says, whoa, we don't want to test God's plan here. Let's throw him in the pit. And if he's in the pit, if he's meant to be saved, he'll be saved. Yehuda comes along and says, no, that's so unlikely. That's like a huge miracle. You can't ask God to make such a huge miracle to save a guy who's in the middle of a pit in the middle of the desert by himself. That's too much. How about this? Let's sell him. And if after we sell him, he can still get himself out of this mess, then we'll know that his dreams were in fact true. And the Medrash tells us that there's a hint in the language of the actual, of the dream itself, that this is not just dreams, but it's actually prophecy. Let's look back to the dreams here for a second. What's the language that he uses? He says, Shimuna, hear this. Shimuna is the language that throughout Jewish history, all the prophets used to chastise the Jewish people. Shimuna Hamorim, listen carefully, you rebels, right? This language is used, the Medrash says, as a foreshadowing to all the other future times the Jewish people are going to do bad and they need to receive criticism. Shimuna. And notice that the first time they hate him. How did they react the second time? They don't hate him, they're jealous of him. Why is there a difference here? You would think that the Torah tells us they hated him even more after the second time that he had this prophetic moment. So what I think is happening here is that they actually accept it as being prophetic. In other words, what's happening here is he has this first prophetic dream and they're angry. They don't want to accept it. I'm not willing to. But when he has a second dream and it's prophetic and it involves his father and it involves his mother or his mother figure in Bilhah, according to Chazal, where the sun and the moon are also bowing down, they realize that this was in fact prophecy. And this entire story of them selling him, according to the Barbanel, is one in which they are simply trying to challenge whether or not this is really true. And I think within this is a very profound lesson for all of us about how it is that we choose to live our lives when we experience things that we might not like to hear or might not like to be told to us. In other words, when we hear criticism or when we hear something that is not good, so what our natural tendency is to resist it, right? When someone tells us something like very critical, so that hurts our own ego, we don't like it, and so we simply kind of say, no. But the only chance that we can actually become better, the only chance of self-improvement, is if we put our egos on the side and we accept the advice and the criticism, whatever it might be, from the people in our lives. The brothers should have accepted this prophecy. They shouldn't have challenged the prophecy, right? Nobody likes to hear things that are unpleasant. Nobody likes to hear things that put them on a lower pedestal. But the brothers, instead, that mistake they make is that they're testing and challenging God's decree, this divine prophecy, even though that they know it to be true because it's divine. And so I think this entire lesson here is that we need to learn to accept our own realities or our own criticism out of and leave our egos on the side instead of trying to challenge our circumstances, which often can lead to bad and dangerous circumstances. And so as we look back to the brothers themselves are not wicked people. They're just mistaken people. They're brothers who are righteous. Their intentions, whether it's like the Sforno or even the Barbanel, is not that they tried to kill their brother, but rather either they were trying to protect themselves like the Sforno or like the Barbanel. They're simply challenging and trying to understand whether or not this prophecy will come true. And what we see is that in that case, if that's the path we take according to the Barbanel, God doesn't want us to challenge those realities. We need to put our egos aside, accept the criticism in life, and that's the way that we become better people. And that's, I think, the lesson from the story of Yosef and his brothers. So we will stop right here.